Engine man can have love for the truckie. Beautiful minds, but we love getting ugly. Risk takers with a clover, man, we love getting lucky. You run, we chase fire, I love when it ducks me. Tones go off, house watch, read the address out. 1075, get up off the magic couch. 500 gallons prepared for the baddest drought. Who else you want on the way when disaster's Can't out? Even get a little bit rattled when you enter with exit apparel. Mayday, member down, they'll drag you. You won't get this from every Tom, Dick, and Harold, but here's a view from the top floor with Mickey Farrell.
What's up, guys? Thanks for coming back to another episode of A View from the Top Floor. Today's episode's going to hit a little bit differently. I'm honored and humbled to have my guest this morning, which is Lieutenant Jason Redman, a retired Navy SEAL, best New York Times selling author, The Trident. He has defied odds multiple times, from leadership, failure back to redemption and respect, to being shot 8 times, including a round to his face. Jason is the epitome of overcome mindset. He speaks from the heart. He speaks humility, and he speaks in a way that I think that not only the fire service needs to dial into and understand, but growing up in today's world, we need people like Jason to lead by example, to lead through humility and say it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to move forward, and it's okay to learn from these mistakes. So tune in, check out the show. And if you don't know Jason's full story, you can find on the Sean Ryan Show, episode number 32, and on Jocko 163, 2 great interviews where they really dive into his story. Especially the Jocko episode, he reads passages from his book in the regular Jocko style. So if you're into the cliff notes of books rather than actually reading a book, which I do highly recommend reading his book, The Trident, but Jocko dives into some of those passages that can really bring you to Jason's story. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks. All right, Jason, again, thanks for taking the time to come on the show. We'll just jump right into this. So I have been following you from afar for quite some time, and that said, your way of looking at life through humility is something that resonates with me throughout my career, and I think it's something that in the fire service in general, it doesn't really resonate with certain people when it maybe should, if that makes sense, especially within leadership. So again, just thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, honored to be on. Thank you.
So you did a post a couple weeks ago, about a week ago now, and it really spoke to me, and it spoke to a lot of guys in my job, and it kind of got somewhat viral within the fire service. So this may offend you, but I believe standards matter, and we are losing that in this country. I speak to a lot of fire, law enforcement, and military events, and I noticed a disturbing trend in many of the fire, law enforcement, military conferences and association events I'm attending. I noticed the same trend in every event. At least 20% of the audience is grossly out of shape, which tells me, why are we not holding people accountable to these standards? I've heard that many big cities politicians feel it is unclear, even discrimination too, reject people they are physically unable to meet physical job requirements placed on law enforcement and fire profession. So we should lower the standards to allow everyone to have a chance. In reality, this is both dangerous and unfair to those who work hard to meet the high standards that must be maintained. To be the protector of a community is a physically demanding job. Why we have high physical standards. To pull some out of the burning building, to fight a violent aggressor, to carry heavy equipment in high-stress environments, dependent on your physical fitness. How terrible is it if someone shows up to save you and is physically unable to do so? Standards matter, period. So that speaks to all of us who are fighting this battle from the inside out. So
it's a battle we're fighting, not just within the protector community, it's a battle we're fighting within our own nation. I'd say we're reducing standards across the board,
Yeah, and you speak about the Pentagon of peak performance. Does that fall in line with this mindset that you're speaking of?
I think it does. The Pentagon is just a system I put in place for my own life after I got off course as a young leader. And I just think it's the 5 key areas. It's one of the basis of the book Overcome, my second book that I wrote. I think good leaders understand we have to have balance in this life. And balance doesn't mean like I have these perfect buckets of time and space for family and work and all these different things. I mean, the real world just doesn't work that way. But the Pentagon is more, these are the areas that I need to make sure I'm putting time and effort into. Physical leadership being one, sleep, nutrition, fitness. Number two is mental leadership, how we're constantly trying to absorb knowledge. We should be constantly seeking knowledge, reading. You know, for some people, it's podcasts, whatever it is, but you're constantly trying to grow and challenge. And one of the biggest things I tell people is you should be challenging your beliefs. Just because something has always been done one way doesn't mean that it's still the right way. You know, things change. Technology comes along, new systems come along. Number three is emotional leadership. How are you managing your emotions? Definitely a big one for me that it's taken years to really conquer that one. Number four is social leadership. How do we put time and effort in the rings of influence around us? And number five is spiritual leadership. So how do we get outside of ourselves, get perspective beyond the world that we're in, especially our own individual world. Most of us live in our own world and, you know, oh, woe is me, my problems are the worst problems, you know, which is kind of a funny thought when there's 8 billion people on the planet. And, you know, there are people that are born into poverty, slavery, war zones. You know, if you have the freedom to walk out of the house and go to 7-Eleven and get a Coke, your life is not that bad.
Yeah. You know, let's go back to the emotional leadership. I think that's something that when we're talking about the peak performance of operating under stress, which is something obviously you're extremely familiar with, and I think it's something that we're not really teaching in the fire academies or in the law enforcement academies early on into our careers. I think that emotional stress, how that affects our ability to perform within that moment.
Well, and let's take it full circle back to the beginning to physical leadership, because here's the reality. I tell everybody physical leadership is the foundation because it's very hard to have strong emotional leadership, mental leadership, social leadership, spiritual leadership if your physical leadership is terrible. I don't care who you are as a human. If this machine you walk around in doesn't operate at a decent level, meaning you are cognizant of it, that you work it, you know, you put it through its paces and you make your machine work well, everything else is built on top of that. So if in the middle of a high stress situation, you are so gassed because your machine is not working well, because you haven't trained it to, your emotional leadership is going to be weak. That's the reality. To be an effective leader in any situation, much less a high stress situation where lives are dependent on your decisions and dangerous things are happening around you. That's why it's so critical. And that's why I'm so adamant about this in the protector community. Your teammates' lives depend on your fitness. And really the people that you should be going to save. I mean, when you're reporting to a fire or you're reporting to a dangerous situation as a law enforcement officer, or in our case, I mean, if you look at it from a military perspective, your fitness is what can make the difference, especially to save someone or, God forbid, one of your teammates or fellow firefighters. I mean, how terrible would that be if something happened and you were unable to save your teammate because your fitness wasn't at the level that it should be?
Yeah, you know, it's something I hear you say over and over again is lead yourself. And when we talk about leaders, especially in the fire service, I think we have to remember that leadership isn't necessarily the leader or the officer per se. It's leadership comes from within that company. And I'm sure with you in the military, leadership came from within, but that also comes from leading yourself. And if we're not able to perform physically, what's that cutoff point for the mental stress when that's added to it? So do you think that having that physical capability can override the mental side of it when you're introduced to the stress and things kind of tend to go the wrong way sometimes?
Well, I think that the mental gets built on the physical. You know, the days of individuals being forged through hardship of life are moving away. We live in this incredibly civilized society now. You know, 250 years ago, you and I would have been born, and we probably would have been born on a farm, most likely out in the middle of nowhere into a pretty hard existence. Like, hey, guess what? We're going to farm and we're going to kill animals to survive. And we're going to chop down trees and build our own houses and all these different things. That was very hard labor and very hard living back then. So, fast forward into the industrial evolution, probably still some pretty hard manual labor. Today, we don't really have that. I mean, somewhat in the protector community, there's still a heavy physical aspect of this job, although the downside is now we're degrading it. Let me go back to what I was saying, though, that naturally, having to do hard things physically builds what I call an overcome mindset. Because it's hard. You're having to deal with pain, and you're having to deal with discomfort, and you're having to deal with grinding through these uncomfortable situations, whether that's, the cold or hard physical labor or whatever adversity that you're driving through. So today, we don't really have that. You have to incorporate that into your life. In the protector community, we have to do it through training. So it's either got to be done by yourself. You have to lead yourself through that physical activity, or it's done through some level of training, whether that's group training. I think if you don't do that, then yes, you are going to be weaker mentally when things start to add up. Like I said, I think that physical is the foundational level, and then everything grows on that. The mental, your mental toughness, your ability to withstand discomfort, your ability to withstand problems, and then emotionally, your ability to manage that better.
So in the SEALs, can you talk about trauma training and what that is and how that corresponds to building that resilience within, your inner core under battle?
So when you talk about trauma training, the training that we went through on how to deal with gunshot wounds and injuries and stuff on the battlefield?
Yeah, like in the moment, you walk into an ambush per se, that happens. How do you deal with that stress and trying to do the trauma training as well as still command your company and still get out alive or perform to kill the enemy? Like, how does that all kind of fall in line? Because thinking about on the fire side of things, we're in a situation where there's a mayday given and we have to administer some type of either removal or some kind of medical attention within that moment. A lot of times the stress levels are so high that we have to somewhat remove ourselves within the command level structure to identify just the problem.
And training is the answer. I mean, you've got to, and it's a crawl, walk, run approach. You can't take people and place them into, I couldn't take the average civilian and place them into a very complicated close quarters combat situation where you had multiple shooters from different locations and explosions and wounded people and wounded members of your team all at once. That would be a very advanced scenario for any team to deal with. Instead, we start out very simple. Hey, you have one room that you're going to clear. And all you have is one bad guy in it. And from there, it escalates up. So we increase the levels of stress and complexity in order for teams to be able to manage that better. And if you're a leader, which one of the things that I think the SEAL teams do a really good job on is we teach everybody to be a leader. In the absence of leadership, I will step up and lead. So oftentimes, it's not like our new guys are flowing through a target and they're waiting for the leader to say, oh, shoot that guy. We train to know if he's a bad guy, we eliminate him. If there's a hostage, we're going to, rescue and protect that person. If there is an open door, we're going to flow through it, whatever it is. So I think that all of that comes down to training. No different than anything in life. If you do hard things and if you train yourself to be able to think through dangerous and complicated scenarios, you're going to do better. You're going to be able to manage fear better. You're going to be able to task prioritize better, all those things. But that doesn't happen don't get me wrong. Some people naturally can handle those things better than others, but all of us take training to get to that level.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's mental rehearsal. If we replay these situations over and over and over when it's time to react, there's something to saying you've been there before. I think that's
I think that's a side of training that we really haven't dove into, at least in the public safety side, like visualizing the fire, visualizing what you're going to do under stress. It's really hard to introduce stress within the training side of the fire service, mainly because there's so many crazy state laws that limits us to actually burning to a level of what a fire would be. And I think that's where we're kind of failing. And I think that's where, circling back to the standards from that post, is that's where we're losing, because we're not developing the stress level that almost weeds these people out early on. We can't give that to them. So now they're making it all the way through the academy and almost into the field many times. And then that's a detriment, and that's extremely, extremely dangerous.
And when I'm hearing from friends, and I speak a lot for fire and law enforcement. I mean, I love speaking to the protector community, but what I hear from friends is frequently they're having more and more individuals who are being moved into leadership positions who never did things on the tactical level. And they basically said, well, that's not fair that I'm being discriminated or segregated because you're saying, oh, well, you didn't lead at this tactical level. So they get put into these positions where they don't have that background. So they're not enforcing the training that needs to happen, which, once again, just like I wrote in that post, I think that's dangerous. It's dangerous for our citizens, with the police and fire services that we're putting out there. And the worst thing, it's dangerous for you guys. It's dangerous for the guys doing the job. So I think that's a problem. I think that we truly need to make standards matter. I think we truly need to hold people accountable. Either you meet the level that you need to physically, academically, psychologically, whatever standards we've set, you either meet it, regardless of race, creed, color, gender persuasion. I don't care. You give me a demographic. None of that matters. You either meet the standard or you don't. And I think we have to get back to that because, these are dangerous jobs, especially in dangerous jobs. Although I think we need to get to that level everywhere to get back to, if you look at the public education system, we're continuing to lower the standards. Hey, here's the standardized testing for math, science, and English and writing. But what we're starting to see is like 30% of kids are not passing. So instead of saying, wow, we really got to do something to raise the standards, we're lowering the standards for the tests so that we can make it so that the 30% now feel good about themselves and actually are passing. And what's starting to happen across our country is, man, our scores are markedly below so many other nations that are out there in all these different areas. I mean, we're having less and less kids who are able to academically get into programs like science and technology programs and things that they need, good math skills, good analytical skills, and things like that. So, yeah, we're hurting ourselves as a nation further down the road by this lowering of standards that continues to occur.
So we homeschool our children, and we have for, I don't know, I guess this is 3-4 years now, post-COVID. Like during COVID, that became the thing. We were talking about it pre-COVID, and then we were kind of forced into it. And then we started to realize that the system is not necessarily working the right way, like you just said. And that just reinforces what made our decision, because now we could craft our children a certain way. Now they're talking about going back to school this year in September. And my wife and I, we've thrown it around. We've talked about it. I think they're ready for a change to give it a shot. But I'm already seeing, as far as like these children that they're interacting with, the standard of just socializing with people and having an adult conversation, I think that lacks in the public school system. Everyone says that the public school system is about being social and all these activities and sports. And there's a lot of truth to that. My kids are very much involved with after school activities, but I don't see young kids looking adults in the eyes and shaking their hand and saying, hello, how was your day? And just stuff like that. And that's ultimately, I think ultimately the character that we're losing at an early level is coming somewhat from the school system, like you said, because the system is broken and we're lowering standards at the youngest level,
Yeah, I agree. And some of that has a lot to do with technology. I actually was at dinner on Saturday night, and a friend of ours invited a friend who was a school teacher for 6th and 7th grade, I believe. And he was talking about the problem with phones. that all these kids have their phones in the classroom and that the teachers are not allowed to take their phones away. It's like one of their rights to have their phone. But what happens is they're constantly on their phones. They're constantly texting with their friends, which once again becomes you nailed it. It becomes a socialization issue. I talk about the fourth level of the Pentagon as social leadership. So how do we build our rings of friends? How do we communicate? How do we do these things? And one of the things that I did with my kids was over the years, and thankfully I was blessed after I got injured, we went to a lot of events. And I would bring my kids to most of them so that they could learn how to socialize, how to have small talk, how to talk through things. And a lot of kids aren't getting that. Their only form of communication is through this device right here. I went and spoke to the Marine Corps several years ago, and the Marines were having, and a lot of the military, I think, is having a big mental health crisis in their younger warriors. And part of the problem they were talking about is when kids come through boot camp, before they go to boot camp, they've lived their life in this. And now they do take this away when they go to boot camp, but as soon as they get out of boot camp, they get this back. And what happens is instead of assimilating into the new culture that they're a part of, Marine Corps, Army, Navy, Fire Service, they go right back to the old network they were in. So now they sit in their rooms and they're on their old network and they're not assimilating into the new culture and organization that they're a part of. They don't know how to socialize and become a part of it. So it's a real challenge today. Like, how do we encourage the future youth of America to once again build real relationships with humans instead of this virtual world we're living in?
I mean, it's as simple as you're in the firehouse, you're at the kitchen table. I'm sure you hear about the kitchen table, right? And that's where all the ball breaking goes on. The learning, the fun, the tears, the laughter, all that's all in the kitchen. And now the tones go off and you go out the door. You have to be able to interact with the community, right? We can't text what's the problem. You have to be able to communicate and talk. And I think that, again, going back from all the way from elementary school, pushing up into the fire academies today is what I'm seeing is just that. And there's just no adult interaction per se. And adult meaning not an age group, just the understanding that you're coming onto this job, you have to act like a professional. Do you see that in the Navy today, or is it the standard still there in the Navy?
I can't speak for that because obviously I've been retired for over, a decade at this point. I have friends of mine that are still in various leadership positions, and they believe obviously that our SEAL teams are still strong, and I can only speak for that. I know that the military as a whole is struggling with some of that, the network generation that's coming up. And you're seeing more and more. I'm watching more and more scientists that are putting things out like the degradation on our youth because of social media. But I also think that big business drives a lot of that, big business and all the algorithm stuff. We want as many eyeballs on it as possible, because the longer you're on your phone and you're scrolling, the more things you're being exposed to, which, supports the big money machine. And not saying that as a conspiracy theorist, I'm saying that as just reality. So yeah, I don't know. We kind of went down this interesting rabbit hole, but, it is, how do we balance technology with humans being able to interact as humans and also to maintain standards and maintain people doing hard things? Because with the advent of AI, I mean, I'm beginning to hear, hey, AI, soon, there'll be some point in the future when no one will have to work. And that doesn't sound that great to me. But for a lot of people, that sounds amazing. But I think humans we're purpose-driven individuals. So I think as humans, you feel good when you complete things. So if you get things done, it makes you feel good. I don't care who you are. So if you sat around and did nothing all day, I mean, at some point, I think you'd lose your mind.
Yeah. And you said that AI is making us so we don't want to work. I think it's making us so we don't have to think or learn. The answers are right there for you a lot of times. Circling back to what you said something earlier about just how you have friends and in the fire service or the law enforcement, and they say they're having people going to positions with no experience to lead, and that's a problem in the biggest city to the smallest town, I feel like. And that comes from, I think, the fact that I wouldn't say fire duty in general is down, like, and that's what you always hear the case, but I think it's all relevant to the timing of, they compare the war years to today, and they calculate that into the ultimate number. Then the war years during the 70s in New York City, the numbers were way influxated to the far right. It was tremendous numbers that you'll never see again, but that gets calculated in. So I do think the fire duty is up. I'm just not sure where we're losing the idea that we're not getting the experience. And you can see it because you see it from leaders that aren't allowing their men to work. The men want to work. You have to let your people do their job. And when you're being held back by leaders in the field, that's where we're starting to fail. And that's where the standards are lowered. Like, I had a senior guy I used to work with all the time. He retired years ago, but he would say half the kids in this firehouse wouldn't be able to cut it 10, 15 years ago here. And there's a lot of truth to that, because we had leaders that let their men work. And when you let your men work, it kind of equals out the playing field, and you get to see who can actually perform their duties, let their tools do their talking, and win the game, more or less. It's kind of a make or break situation. But I think having those leaders in those positions that don't have the experience are reluctant to let their people work, for one, because I think that it's an embarrassment because they haven't put the work in. But two, it's like they don't know where the limitations are,
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you saw the difference between individuals who, and it is, you saw the difference between individuals who obviously had the experience, especially coming out of the war, individuals who had been in combat and they had understood the complexities of it. And I think I definitely learned my lessons I talk about in this book. I wanted, in my first book, how much I wanted to get into a gunfight. And I think, all warriors want to prove themselves, but I think that's a hard line for leaders. Like, hey, we don't want to recklessly put guys into harm's way just because we want to get into a gunfight. Like, we need to have a good reason. It needs to be justified. We obviously need to have a good plan. And I think leaders with experience can see that. I guess the flip side of the coin is leaders without experience may, A, put their guys in dangerous situations that they shouldn't be in, or B, out of fear, because they don't have the experience, not allow them into that situation because they don't know how to manage it. So I think it's a double problem, which, once again, I feel like, how do we set the standards of, hey, here's the minimum requirements to hold this job. If you are a fire chief or a fire lieutenant, here's the minimum requirements. I mean, that's how it was in the SEAL teams. And it didn't necessarily mean, obviously we go through different phases. I mean, if you look at it in the military, we have peacetime and wartime. So I came in 92. There wasn't a whole lot of combat that was happening up until 9/11. So there was a lot of training, not as much combat. And then all of a sudden, 9/11 forward, it became like all combat. But for us, there was a very set pipeline, and it's still to this day, that guys had to go through. You could not become a platoon chief, which is, one of the pinnacle leadership positions for an enlisted SEAL, without having done multiple other jobs prior to that. You had to successfully complete those jobs. Same thing as an officer. There were specific jobs that prepared you for those positions that you had to successfully complete. If you did not successfully complete them, you could never do that job. They would never place you in a, well, let's just hypothetically say you could never be the commanding officer of a SEAL team if you never did a platoon commander position. If you never successfully did that position, that would never happen, ever, because you didn't successfully complete the pipeline that we had established for that.
So when did you realize that you were a leader? We could talk about being a leader. We want to be leaders, but when did you know for sure inside yourself that moment where you're like, you know what, I got this. I am a good leader. These guys are following me. Now, I know your story, and I think many of us know your story, but I know it was jeopardized, that confidence level. But leading up to that moment, where do you think it clicked for you? Where you're like, I understand what I'm doing?
Well, I think that was the problem. I think I showed aspirations of leadership. I think I did a lot of good things that that set me up to potentially be a good leader. And I was recommended for commissioning programs and things like that. I think where I lost my way for a while is I started to think of myself as this great leader without continuing to do all the work behind the scenes. I talk about leading yourself. I wasn't effectively leading myself. And I frequently talk to people about this in the seminars and speeches when I talk to fire, law enforcement, and even corporate companies. I talk about the days of do as I say, not as I do are gone. So you can't, 75% of leadership is your ability to lead yourself. And this is where I got off course. So many people want to say, hey, follow me because I'm the leader. You know, look at this rank I have on my collar. I'm the leader. You should follow me. But if they're not effectively leading themselves, you're going to have a really hard time getting people to follow you. You know, I talked about it, you know, do people follow you because they want to or because they have to? If they follow you because they want to, you are a good leader of yourself. You set the example, you get things done, you're a goal setter, you have structure, you are measured, you're balanced. If they're following you because they have to, you're basically telling them what to do, but you got some work to do on the backside. And I had messed all that up and got myself in trouble. And it was when I finally took a step back and said, wow, I really need to reinvent myself as a leader. And thankfully I had leaders that believed in me and gave me the chance to do that. That my first book, The Trident, is all about that. It is about that, you know, leadership failure as a young SEAL officer and then course correcting and fixing myself. So when did that occur? I would say decisively, there was a moment that occurred over the period. So for SEAL platoons or troops, there is a deployment cycle, and it lasts about 2 years. A year and a half is all training, and then 6-7 months is a deployment. During the height of the war, that meant that deployment was a combat deployment. So when I screwed up as a leader, it definitely took a long time to rebuild my credibility and the respect of the guys. And that occurred slowly through that workup and that training cycle. But I didn't win everybody over. It wasn't until we got into combat, which, as you well know, you know, training's one thing. The real job is the difference. And combat being the great equalizer, in my opinion. You know, and it was there that on a big, very complicated mission in June of 2007 that, you know, we got into a big gunfight and navigated our way out of that pretty well. And a lot of the guys were like, Red did a great job. And I kind of felt like at that moment, I was like, man, you've come full circle. Like, you made good calls. You made the right calls. You made the calls for the guys. It wasn't about you. I actually changed what I was originally doing because it was a bad call. And my team leader said, that's not a good call. And probably the old me would have said, I don't care. You're going to do it. And instead, the newer me said, wow, you're right. That is a bad call. Let's change this and do this a different way. So that was a big defining moment for me. And, you know, driving forward from there.
You said the moment you screwed up as a leader. Do you think when you made that decision to go into that valley, you screwed up as the leader, or you just made a decision that jeopardized your platoon or your company?
I would say I made a decision that jeopardized my platoon. And the interesting thing is, if I had owned it then in that moment, like right after it all had happened, if I had said, you know what, that was a bad call. It was a call. Even if I had not admitted it was a selfish call driven by I wanted to get in the fight, even if I had just said that was a bad call and learned from it, it wouldn't have been as big a deal. You know, because a lot of people have been in the military like, wow, you know, you really got smacked down. Well, I got smacked down because I fought back so much about it. You know, I stayed adamant that I had not made a bad call, that it was a good call, and that I was just getting thrown under the bus. I took the victim mindset. Oh, you guys don't like me. I'm the victim. And so that's why I think the repercussions were harsher, because I needed to grow up. I needed to be humbled, and I needed to accept ownership for the mistake that I had made. And that took some time. It took some humbling and walk that path.
So let's fast forward. So you rebuild your commitment from your men. They trust you. You believe your platoon is going to follow you. And then you go into another mission on September 13th, 2007. Special operations mission. You were struck by machine gun fire. The first hit your left elbow, then the right side of your face, entered your jaw and exited through your nose. We know your story. Many of us know the story, but I want to know, where was your mind September 12th, leading into that mission, as far as the leadership standpoint?
Phenomenal. I had come full circle at a very high level, man. I mean, on September 12th, September 11th and 12th, we always try to operate on September 11th. As the war was going on, we always wanted to be on the battlefield on September 11th. And unfortunately, so that mission that actually it was a different mission, but we were launching on got canceled. It fell through and it didn't happen. So September 12th, and we were only a couple weeks from going home. So September 12th, we kind of shifted focus again, and we were working on getting everything done to go home. We were working on awards for all the guys. We were working on redeployment. And I myself was working on my next set of orders. I put in a package to screen for our next tier SEAL team, and that had been approved. So I was super excited about that. I was coming home, which is a big deal. You have to be approved both by your commanding officer and your peers to do that. So that was the other confirmation that, hey, you did a good job. Like you're leading, because they don't let officers go over there if they're not making good decisions and leading well. And then if that didn't happen, I was looking at what was my next jobs that I could do. So all these things, that was probably happening September 12th. I also know that it was probably about that day that my boss came up to me and said, hey, Red, you've been doing great. My boss was the overall guy in charge. And typically when we went out on missions, he would be what we called the ground force commander. He was overall in charge of everything that happened on the ground in a mission. I had been running as an assault force commander, a mobility force commander. The ground force commander runs everything on the ground. And he came to me and he said, hey, Red, you've been doing great. This next mission, I want you to run as the ground force commander. So that was, a big deal. Like, they were preparing me for the next level of leadership as I moved up, and I would have moved into the platoon commander position. And so all those things said, hey, man, you did it. You got your career back on track. You're leading yourself. You're leading effectively. And, it's all good. And then, of course, the mission came down the next day, and he came up to me and said, hey, Red, I know I talked to you about being the ground force commander for this mission, but he said, we knew this was going to be a very hairy mission. It was a very high level mission, very dangerous. We fully expected very heavy resistance. And he said to me, I don't think this is the mission for you to be the ground force commander on. He said, but you'll be the assault force commander for the actual target takedown. So that's kind of how that unfolded. And so, yeah, that was the day before the big mission.
So the events that happened the next day, do you think that where you were the day before has brought you to where you are today with what you're doing and how you're really truly changing not only the future of the Navy SEALs, but you're changing the future of every young warrior out there? Do you think that everything that leading up from the moment in the valley to the day before and then the day of that ambush, do you think that's where you are and why you are who you are today?
Yeah, but I think it goes all the way back. I mean, all of us walk different roads in this life. And I think it's the culmination of all our experiences that make us who we are. Usually it's the biggest failures that make you into who you are. Successes are great. But for most people, when we have these high levels of success, what we often ignore are the knockdowns, the setbacks, the failures that came prior to that. And for me, that was, it was a long path from a young kid who basically said, I want to be a Navy SEAL, all the way up until that moment, that I got all shot up on the battlefield. And I would say it even continued beyond that by far. I mean, that wasn't if anything, I mean, I can almost say that, man, that sign on the door. And as a matter of fact, there are some shitty SEALs out there who will say to me, you didn't do anything in your career other than write a piece of paper, which is bullshit, not true. But, you're always going to have naysayers and haters. Interesting. When I wrote my book, The Trident, the agent that I had who passed away last year, God rest his soul, Jim Hornfisher. Jim and I didn't see eye to eye on the book. When I originally proposed The Trident, he didn't want me to write about my mistakes. He was like, nobody wants to read that. And I was like, Jim, I don't know if that's true. And I said, not only that, I said, I'm not going to be a SEAL who writes a book and talks about all the great things that I did, because I'm not Johnny Super SEAL. That's not me. I'm not, some Medal of Honor recipient or anything like that. I'm a human who aspired to be a leader and part of this community, and I made mistakes along the way, but I grew up and I learned from those mistakes. And what I recognize is everybody out there is also that way. None of us ran through this life skipping down the yellow brick road, knocking down success after success after success. So I was like, this is my story, and it's a story I want to tell. And we butted heads a lot on that. But I definitely think that it was a story I wanted to tell, and it resonates with so many people. There's so many people out there who will reach out to me and say, man, thank you so much. Like, I was that guy. I was that guy who was too arrogant, who thought too highly of himself, who failed and didn't think there was anything I could do to recover from it. But your story has enabled me to drive forward. And I love that, man. I tell people it's never too late to come back from mistakes.
It's funny. I was running a few weeks ago, and I was listening to one of the podcasts we've done, and I heard you say that, how the guy that you write in the book, but didn't want you to do anything negative. They want to talk about you being a great warrior, and which was great. And I yelled out loud on my run. I was like, no, I go, that's what makes you so incredible. That's what separates you from so many is that humility and the ability to bring people from a point of failure, but failure from within a lot of times. Like, you have the scars obviously on your face, and you were built up to that point, but there's so many people with scars inside of them of failure that no one sees and no one addresses and no one talks to, no one asks, how are you doing? And I'm not talking so much PTSD. I'm just talking about moments throughout your life or career where things didn't go out as you planned. And you have a way of bringing that out in people and letting people know that it is okay to make mistakes and you can rebuild, like you just said. So I'm just so glad that you did write the book the way you did, because it resonates with so many people.
Oh, thank you. And it's funny. There are people on social media that'll write me, they'll talk about this idea of no fail missions, and they'll bring it into their business, they'll bring it in their life, and they're like, I'll never fail. I'm like, you know what, man, you're living in la la land. Everybody fails at some point. Even members of our top tier units that do no fail missions have failed. That's the reality. But that's the difference, if you accept, we don't live our life planning on failure. I mean, obviously that's not the case. We want to be successful, but everybody's going to fail at some point. That's what an overcome mindset is. That's what I talk about. Your willingness to get up and drive forward. I mean, I think one of the greatest compliments I ever had was at my retirement ceremony where, Vince Peterson, who I write about in the book, in both books, probably one of the best leaders I ever saw on the SEAL teams, spoke at my retirement and said, I was probably one of the only guys he had ever seen who failed and damaged his reputation as badly as I did, and then brought it back up to, leave at such a respected level. Leadership is a journey with highs and lows. It's also a journey that never ends. You're going to mess up, if you're off course on your journey to be a better leader, look in the mirror. That's the first place you should be looking. How well are you leading yourself? Are you meeting all the standards that have been set? Physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually. Are you meeting all those standards? Because if you're not, you're going to have a hard time leading other people. I'll tell you that right now. And here's the other thing. Deep down inside, you're looking at the mirror, knowing, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, that you're not meeting the standards. And that's actually damaging your credibility as a leader with yourself. So, yeah, man, it's not too late. I mean, I'm still not perfect. I still mess up, but I sure try and always, course correct, right back on course. Hey, I'm a little bit off right now. Get back on course. A little bit off right now. Back on course.
Yeah. So, Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about the Navy SEAL swim coming to New York City in August?
Yeah. So the SEAL swim, big shout out to Bill Brown. Bill Brown is the founder of the SEAL swim. It is an absolutely amazing patriotic event for any of you out there in the first responder, fire, military community. Anybody can do it, though. I want to tell you that. Anybody out there, if you are a decent swimmer and you're in decent shape, you can come do the swim. You have to qualify for it. There are qualifications because it's a no joke swim. It's 3.5 miles across the Hudson River, along with about 2.5 miles of a slow run, along with 3 stations that we stop at along the way where you'll do 100 push-ups and 22 pull-ups. So yes, 300 push-ups and 66 pull-ups total. It is probably one of the most patriotic events that I do. And Bill wanted to bring people together for a showing of patriotism, a love for this country, an honoring of New York City where 9/11 happened. And something that brought so many of us together, whether it was in the SEAL teams or the military or fire and law enforcement, it just became this amazing intersection of the protector community. And then he recognized that when we, in the SEAL teams frequently, the same thing in the protector community. I actually just wrote about this on Memorial Day, that some of the most amazing times of my life, we're celebrating after doing something really hard, something dangerous, something like, holy shit, I can't believe we made it out of that alive, or holy shit, that was the hardest training evolution I've ever done. And having a drink and laughing and that camaraderie that came with that. And Bill wanted to recreate that. He wanted to create something hard. And it is hard. It's about a 3.5 hour evolution. But it is amazing. So if any of you guys are interested, go to Navy SEAL. I actually think we are locked out this year. There may be some more slots, but I think they were trying to cap it at damn near 400 swimmers. But it is an amazing event.
I love what you said, how they captured that moment after something hard and the camaraderie after that, because there's something about after a fire or a good job where we're truly, truly tested. That beer hits a little bit different at the bar, and I love catching a fire towards the end of our tour as, everyone's going home, like, hey, let's grab a beer, and it's just like you kind of replaying the moments and laughing and joking. And that's where, a lot of the learning comes from that moment of humility, because 1 or 2 beers, now, I did this, I should have done that. I made this move, I should have made that move. And that's where the true learning comes. And it comes from humility. And again, circling back, that comes back to what you're doing and showing so many of us that it's okay to talk about the mistakes, we do have a team with the FDNY, and like you said, this is a no joke competition. Just looking at knowing the guys that are doing it, we have guys from 33 Truck, Rescue 3, Rescue 4, and there's a Chicago firefighter joining the team. The team's called the Smoke Eaters, so it's a New York City fire dudes doing it. They're doing it, and I know these guys, and I know how in shape they are. It's intimidating because I was asked one year, and I said, "Man, I'd love to, but there's no way I can keep up with you guys." So, but it's going to be a fun day. I'll definitely be there. So, like Jason said, if anyone's in New York, it's such a great day of just community, and like you said, bringing everything together from the military to the police department.
And Mickey, if you're not ready to do it this year, you can't get in, still come. I got to tell you what, man, when all the swimmers get out of the water in Lower Manhattan and we get all the flags and we formation run into Ground Zero, and they've got the police pipe and drum band. I mean, there must have been 1,000 people there last year as we came into the Ground Zero. It was so moving. It was amazing. So it's worth seeing to bring your kids. If you want an amazing event, there are great speakers at the end. We have speakers. So yeah, it is amazing. I'll be in New York this weekend.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm doing the Tunnels to Towers climb, World Trade Center climb. I've launched a new I'm partners in a new beverage company, and we are sponsoring the after party. Patriot Seltzer. We're getting Patriot Seltzer to the market. It's a whiskey-based seltzer that honors our amazing protector community. So right now I'm featured on one can, but the goal is to have a law enforcement, fire, and medical individual, what we call proud patriots, on every can. And we want to do 5% of the proceeds from every sale will go back to a nonprofit that takes care of that community. So yeah, I'll be in New York on Sunday for that.
Cool. So I don't want to take too much of your day, and I really appreciate you coming on. But I have one question that I have to ask you that I think that many of us are just need to know the answer. Are you a Lady J or a Scarlet type guy?
Say that again?
Are you Lady J or are you Scarlet?
Oh, definitely Scarlet. Yeah,
right.
definitely
So
Scarlet. Come on.
Guys type guy?
Yeah, snake eyes girl. Come on, man. I mean, yeah, all day long.
I've heard you numerous times say how you're a G.I. Joe buff, and I, as well as growing up and a bunch of other guys, we're like grown adults sending pictures of old G.I. Joe posts or whatever else we see, but it's just funny. We were talking about that. Did you know anybody that had the aircraft carrier, the USS Flag?
I did not. I did not know anyone. I had a lot of the different stuff as a kid, man, but I did not have the aircraft carrier, and I did not know anybody that did.
Yeah, my neighbor did. This kid, spoiled brat he was. He had that. He had everything on it. This thing was so big you could actually sit on it and play G.I. Joe, you know?
Ridiculous. So, I used to take my stepmom would get so mad at me because I would take the guys apart. I would unscrew them and I would reconfigure. I would make new guys. Yeah. So it was fun.
They don't make G.I. Joe toys like they used to. I tried to get my son to watch the cartoons with me. I'm like, buddy, put this on. You're going to love it. And he's entertained for about 5 minutes, and I find he's out of there, you know? But
yeah, well, it's kind of amazing. There's a group called Patriot Force that has made modern day warriors into like G.I. Joe figures. It's pretty cool. So I'm one of them. Tim Kennedy, Sean Ryan. I mean, you name any of your Marcus Luttrell. I mean, any of your big warriors that are out there in the spotlight. Cody Alford. And they're actually making a new line. The original line was kind of small. And they're making a new fully articulated version that's coming out soon, but it's kind of cool. They're more of collector's items. They're expensive per se, but 50% of the proceeds goes back to support nonprofits of choice of the individuals. So like my funds go back to support the SEAL Future Foundation, which is a program that supports SEALs holistically. So yeah, if any of you guys get a chance and you're into that, check out Patriot Force.
Did you have wetsuit?
I did have a wetsuit.
Yeah. He was what? I think he was one of the Navy SEALs. I'm not sure who else. Shipwreck was. I don't know if Shipwreck was actually a Navy SEAL or not.
Shipwreck was a Navy guy. No, he was just a Navy guy. But although I didn't know what a SEAL was back then, I wasn't that impressed. We were all impressed, obviously, with the Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. They were they were the elite.
Cool. All right, man, Jason. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, talk about some things that I think that the fire service struggles with, and I'm just so happy that the War You Are is bringing it out, and it's letting young firefighters especially know it's okay to make mistakes and you can rebuild from those mistakes being made. So thanks so much for your time, buddy. Yeah,
man, it's my honor. And I'll tell you what, it's not just young firefighters. It's exciting. I've had some older firefighters who have reached out, not always. There's some that are offended. I hear it, I hear, hey, fuck that guy, frequently. At the comments that I make about holding yourself to a higher standard. But what's also cool is I've had some older chiefs reach out and say, hey, you know what, man, I needed that. I needed that fire to remind me that I needed to hold myself to a higher standard. And I love that because that's leadership.
They should have you speak. I mean, you do speak at many conferences and in academies, but I would love to have you speak at the New York City Fire Academy because I think that your message on such a broad scale of so many individuals, I mean, we're the largest fire academy in the world. It could hit so many careers and change them from day one, because circling back to where we started with this was that the outside forces, the civilians, the politicians, they're the one that's changing the standard. It's not necessarily coming from within the fire service, and that's where we're losing because the outside influence is getting too much onto the inside. And that's where we're ultimately going to change the game. And we're going to have to be able to change it back to where we came from. And I think it comes from guys like you getting involved. And I'd love to make that connection somehow, but maybe we'll see where that goes in the future.
Yeah, let me know. Obviously, I mean, definitely, I always want to give back. So I do a discounted rate, obviously, for fire, law enforcement, military.
Cool. All right, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, Mickey. Thanks, brother.
Okay.
Hey, if anybody's looking for me, jasonredman.com.
Good man. Okay, thank you.